So let's actually look at the code for some of these. This is your basic form element. All controls need to always be inside of a form element. And just a tip, although it's technically allowed for you to apply CSS style to the form element, the application in browsers is really terrible, especially in Internet Explorer. So if you do want to add styling to the box level element around a form, add a div around it and style the div instead of the form, because you're going to just run into a lot of problems trying to apply presentational stuff to the form. So every form has, here's where it ends here, here's where it begins, and inside of it is all sorts of stuff, but most importantly inputs and various controls. Now the form, if you really want it to be useful, and this is just demonstration, so we're just looking at it, but when you want it to be used in the real world, you need to have a method and an action. The method will tell it how to send the information, and the action will tell it where to send the information. So this is just an example. If you have a PHP file called processor form, you could send it using the get method to this PHP file, and it'll be able to accept that information and deal with it depending on what it is. And usually the browser will redirect the user to the location of this. So this PHP file will actually output some information, something like your form has been successfully submitted. The get method will send it using the browser URL in name value pairs. So sometimes you'll see in the URL there's little question marks and then variables and equal signs and then other things in ampersands. That's when you're using the get method more often than not. The other method is post, which can be encrypted. It's not visible to the user, and it kind of goes in the back end, but it's a little bit more powerful too, because it's not limited by the URL. It can be characters that aren't allowed in the URL and things like that. So this is the basic way of setting up an input. You want to label your input so that your users know what they're filling in, and the proper way to do that is the label element. And it's a really handy element because it automatically associates with the form input. So if I were to click on the label here, it actually highlights the element input for me, just the same as if I click directly on the input, because the browser knows that they're connected. The way that I've done that is I've set the label, I've given the input that it's connected to an ID of name1, and then I use this for attribute, and I put the same ID, and now the browser knows that this input, which is just a regular text input, is connected to this label. And various browsers will hook that up differently. But another way that you can do that is right here. This is the same thing. I haven't got the for attribute here, and I haven't given the input an ID, but because the input is inside the label, it's a child of it, it's nested inside of it, then the browser knows that this text label applies to this element here. You can see the password too. When I click here, it highlights right there. All right. So this is a text, and you've seen the password. This is an input type hidden. So you may have noticed that between the name and the password, even though there's an additional input right here, there's nothing showing up. That's because it's hidden. If I were looking at the source, you'd still see it. So it's not actually a good thing to put something that's secret, because if I view the source of this, the user's still going to be able to see it. But it's just something that you don't need them to have to be thinking about, and it's still something you want to be a part of the form. Passwords are handy for hiding your password from people looking over your shoulder. Next one is the text area. So I actually skipped over this when I was talking about it earlier, but it's got its own element name, text area, and you still need to give it a label. So I'm using the method now where I've got it nested inside because it's a little bit more convenient. And you can actually give text areas sample text like this and save, refresh. Oops. Oh, it's not working, but you can type things in here, and that's kind of an old way of doing it, and that may be why it's not working, is because that's frowned upon. If you want to give it a label, you use this, and if you want to give it sample text, you can use other methods. A couple of attributes that you can use on the text area are calls for columns, say 2 columns. Actually, let's make it 12 columns so you can really see the difference. Let's pull this up in another browser. There. So just make sure I'm saved this. Refresh. There, now it's a little bit thinner instead of wider. So that's just one column. And then if we make it large again, and refresh, it'll be 12 if I type. That's 12. So columns are horizontal, and then we can add the rows. May not have saved that. Oh, there's a syntax error. It's interesting, it's not reacting the way it should. It should actually change the number of rows, but this is sort of a experimental browser. It's a beta because I'm showing some more advanced things up here, down here. So there might be a little bug going on. But normally you would be able to change the rows. Oh, this is a syntax error, that's the problem. Teachable moment. Syntax errors really cause problems. There we go, that's the way it should be. Okay, the max length attribute is a new attribute that lets you set the total number of characters that are allowed in the form. So say we only wanted 5 characters allowed. I can't type anymore. That's surprising. Okay, that's not working. Maybe because, again, this is a beta browser, and this is also a new it's a new thing in HTML5, so it must not be supported in this browser for this element yet, but it will be in the next few years for sure. Wrap can be hard or soft. Hard wrap would mean that when you type in the form and there are line breaks, so it breaks it automatically. The hard wrap will actually, when you submit the form, it'll include these line breaks into it, and if you have a soft wrap, then they won't be. It'll just be software wrapped, and it won't actually look different in the browser, but on the server side when they get it, it will be. And then lastly, you can give it the read-only Boolean attribute. And Boolean means it's either on or off. By default, it's off. But if you turn it on by adding the attribute there, then it makes it read-only, and you can't edit it. See, I'm typing right now, and it's not letting me edit it because it's read-only. And if you were going to be writing this in XML syntax or XHTML, you'd have to write read-only equals read-only. You can't say true or false here because that's not how Boolean attributes work. All right, and then we have the submit, which would be just a simple, if you don't give it a value, then it says submit query in this particular browser. Each browser kind of decides on their own, but you can give it a value. A lot of people feel like submit sounds kind of dominating, like submit to my will or my authority. So you can give a value of send, something very nice sounding if you want. And that will update it. Send, very nice. So that's a submit button. Here's a couple other buttons. I'll show you